Part 97. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 962. Emperor Chu looked at Tang Ning with admiration on his face and said, "I didn't expect you to have such foresight." Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "Thank you." Emperor Chu finally decided to send 100,000 troops to support Wanyan's tribe. Historical experience shows that Chen Chu's biggest enemy is not the western regions or Tibet. Their biggest enemy is on the grassland. Their enemies were the former Sushan people and now the Haiman. Of course, the Sushan people have now made peace with them, and the black man has become their common enemy. When the Chu state announced reinforcements, Tang Ning also sent an order to Xiaoan to also send an army of 100,000 troops to support Wanyan's tribe east and west with the Chu state. Both the western regions and Chu state border large areas of grassland, but Chen state is safer. Although the growth of the black barbarians is not a good thing for Chen state, the threat is smaller after all. Tang Ning does not expect Chen Huang to be able to. The one who sent troops was afraid that he would stare at Xiaoan. Although Tang Ning also wanted to give Wanyan the maximum amount of reinforcements, 100,000 people was already Xiaoan's limit. Once too many troops are deployed, resulting in an emptiness, Chen Kuokuo may take advantage of it. Although the western region is not their home field, it will still cause trouble to Xiaoan today. In addition, after Tang Ning thought about it, she felt that since the agreement with Xiaomani only had 1 year left, but who knew what would happen in 1 year, instead of waiting for her to send troops to Chenguo, she might as well take this opportunity to attack Chenguo first. Go to the grassland and hold her steady for a while. The Chu state already had hundreds of thousands of troops guarding its borders, and this time the 100,000 reinforcements were led by the eldest princess Li Tianlan. Tang Ning moved with her, and half a month later, he and she parted ways in the border army, and followed a small team to go to Wanyan department to discuss the war. Thinking of the meaningful look on her face when she said goodbye, Tang Ning felt a little guilty. However, at this point, she could only pretend not to notice. Xiao Xiao felt bored staying alone in Kyoto, so she came over with Tang Ning. Naturally, old Zheng and the old beggar followed. As for Li Tianlan, perhaps because she was in danger last time on the grassland, the old noodle seller also came with her. Under this situation, Tang Ning naturally had some other thoughts in her mind. With the deterrence of these two nuclear weapons, if they join forces and adopt decapitation tactics, they may be able to minimize the losses. Even if Haiman is determined to destroy the Sushan people, on the frontal battlefield, they and Lao Zhang. During the battle in the western region, Tang Ning truly saw Lao Zhang's skill in using troops. He was a natural-born general, and the battlefield was his destination. At the same time that the Chu state and Xiaoan sent reinforcements to the grassland, Wanyan's request for help also reached the Chen state. After some discussion between the emperor and his ministers, Chenguo rejected Wanyan's request for reinforcements. Their reasons are also very valid. Most of the Chen state's troops are deployed in the state capitals close to the western regions to resist Xiaoan, who may invade Chen state at any time. It is really impossible to divide the troops. This reason seems legitimate, but upon closer inspection, there are loopholes everywhere. Chenguo deployed more than 400,000 troops on the border to defend Xiaoan. Even if there were less than 100,000 troops, it would not have much impact on the overall situation. Moreover, this time Xiaoan also sent 100,000 troops for reinforcements. As a friendly country, Chen's performance was not as good as that of Xiaoan, which seemed extremely unjust. The people were talking about this a lot, but at this time, in the palace, Emperor Chen's face looked ugly. The reason why his face turned dark was not because of the unification of the black barbarians, nor because the Wanyan tribe asked for help, but because Xiaoan from the western region asked the Chu state for marriage, and the Chu state actually agreed. Xiaoan is the enemy of Chenguo, and Chu Guo is Chenguo's friend. The enemy actually hooked up with his friend. Have they considered Chen Guo's feelings? When Chen Guo proposed marriage to Chu state, the reason given by Chu state was that the princesses of Chu state did not associate with foreign countries, but what did this mean? Chen Huang punched the table and said angrily, "What do they mean?" Wei Jian pursed his lips, but finally said nothing. Chu state agreed to Xiaowen's marriage proposal. On the surface, this matter seemed to have nothing to do with Chen state, but the information revealed in it was really shocking. Isn't it that the Chu state was unaware of the relationship between the western regions and the Chen state, but still agreed to Xiaowen's marriage proposal? Does this mean that they had abandoned the Chen state and formed some kind of alliance? Although Xiaowen has been very quiet in the past 6 months, if Chu comes to Xiaowen to attack Chen, will Chu watch with cold eyes, or will he join Xiaowen and cause trouble for Chen? It is already very difficult for the Chen state to deal with Xiaowen. If they add a Chu state whose national strength is comparable to theirs, east and west, Chen state will be divided up by them in less than a year. At a certain moment, Emperor Chen took a deep breath and said, "Summon Lu Ding into the palace." The Ministry of War was not far from the palace, but within 2/4 of an hour, Lu Ding appeared in front of Emperor Chen. Emperor Chen looked at him and asked straight to the point, "Xiaowen has sent 100,000 troops to reinforce the grassland. If we attack the western region at this time, what are the chances of winning?" Lu Ding's eyebrows jumped and he immediately said, "Your Majesty, this is absolutely impossible." Huang Chen glanced at him coldly and asked, "I think this is a rare opportunity for us. Why don't you say it's not?" Lu Ding said, "Your Majesty, before Xiaowen unified the western regions, they were able to deal with our army for a long time. Now that they have unified the western regions, even if they sent 100,000 people, their strength is more than twice what they were before. To attack rashly is to attack me. The army is at a disadvantage." He paused and spoke again, "Besides, Xiaowen sent troops this time to support the Wanyan tribe. If the Wanyan tribe knew that we took advantage of Xiaowen at this time, I am afraid that all the achievements made by Tang Xiang in the northwest a few years ago would be wiped out. At that time, we would have to face the enemies in the western regions and the grasslands at the same time again." Emperor Chen took a deep breath and slowly sat back in his seat. He was also overwhelmed by anger just now, and did not realize that if Chen state took advantage of the situation at this time, the Sushan people, who had become a friendly country, would immediately turn against them. At that time, Chen state would have another powerful foreign enemy. It is very likely that there will be more than one. The relationship between Chu state and the western regions is ambiguous now, and this time it also sent troops to reinforce the grasslands. If Chen state attacked their friendly forces at this time, wouldn't it offend Chu state as well? Thinking of this, Emperor Chen's face became even uglier, because he suddenly realized that he didn't know since when the situation of Chen state had become so bad. Xiaowen, the former enemy, unified the western regions and became even stronger. The former friendly country Chu had an ambiguous relationship with their enemy, and its attitude towards Chen was unknown. The current friendly country Sushan tribe was actually hooking up with Xiaowen. If Chen did not send troops to reinforce, it would probably be isolated by the 3 countries immediately after this incident. In this case, there was no other choice except to send troops to reinforce and show that Chen was on the same front as them. At this time, Lu Ding looked at him and said, "Your Majesty, I think we should not reject the grassland envoys." Chen Huang showed a strong unwillingness on his face, but finally waved his hand and gritted his teeth and said, "Announce the grassland envoys to meet." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 963. Emperor Chen met with the grassland envoys who came to ask for help in the imperial study, and finally agreed to reinforce the grassland. The previous decision of the imperial court to sit back and ignore its allies made the people of the capital unable to hold their heads high, but fortunately, it was not too late to make amends. His Majesty, who had been ignoring the affairs of the court for a long time, finally made a wise decision. Most people thought that His Majesty and the court had suddenly figured it out. Only a few people understood that the court and His Majesty had no second choice in this matter. When the grassland encountered a crisis, even the western regions and Chu state took action. As the Chen state, which was most closely connected with the grassland, chose to stand by and watch, wouldn't it exclude itself from the three kingdoms? If the western regions and the Chu state grasslands collude and the three parties attack the Chen state at the same time, there is no doubt that Your Majesty will become the king of Chen state's subjugation. Even if they are unwilling in their hearts, they must provide this assistance to the grassland. The 100,000 reinforcements provided by Chen state do not need to be dispatched from other places. They already have 400,000 troops stationed in the northwest. Ximen Guard General Xiaoju will be the commander of this reinforcement. These days, he has received more and more attention from His Majesty. Although the matter has been settled, Huang Chen's face in the palace is even uglier than before. After the accident on the grassland, a series of things happened, which made him realize belatedly that the situation in the countries surrounding Chen state had changed so much. The originally calm lake suddenly became turbulent. How Chen Guo could survive in this big wave was a question he had to consider. He didn't know how the western regions got in touch with Chu state. He only knew that after today, Chen state could no longer simply regard the western regions as an enemy, unless he wanted to become everyone's enemy. He glanced at the people below and said, "Let's talk about how we will deal with the relationship with the western region in the future." The Minister of Rights said, "Although I don't know why the western regions connected with Chu and the grasslands so quickly, this is very disadvantageous for us." The Minister of War said, "In this way, if there is a war with the western regions, the attitude of the Chu state and the grassland will become unpredictable. We must change our strategy towards the western regions." A number of officials expressed their opinions one after another. Although they analyzed the problem from different perspectives, the results were similar. That is, Zioan is no longer the Zioan of the past, and the western region is no longer something Chen Guo can move if he wants. At a certain moment, the Prime Minister, who had been silent all this time, stood up and said, "Your Majesty, enemies are easy to resolve but not easy to make. I believe that there is no deep hatred between Chen state and the western regions, and it is not impossible to negotiate peace." "Do you think I don't want to negotiate for peace?" Emperor Chen snorted coldly and said, "If Zioan hadn't been ambitious and provoked a war on the border first, how would the current situation be like this?" Wang Xiang said, "Now and then, these days, Zioan has not caused trouble at the border, and as far as I know, after they completely pacified the western regions, they were also very friendly to the merchants of Chen state. Perhaps this is a good reason for peace negotiations." Chance. Emperor Chen waved his hand and said, "Let's wait until the matter on the grassland is over to discuss this matter." After all the ministers exited, he sighed deeply, with a look of unwillingness on his face. The Chu state once paid tribute to the Chen state, and the western regions were once a vassal of the Chen state, but now, all this has changed. The state of Chu had been on an equal footing with the state of Chen a few years ago, and the small foreign countries in the western regions had also grown into such a behemoth. In the past few years, Chen state's treasury has become more abundant, people's lives have become more prosperous, and there have been fewer external wars. Everything seems to be developing in a good direction. However, in fact, Chu state and the western regions are also developing, and they are better than Chen state. The country has developed faster, and now, in his hands, Chen state has completely lost its previous dominance. This was unacceptable to an ambitious emperor. He had the ambition to dominate the world and have all the barbarians surrender. However, his health was deteriorating and it was impossible to fulfill this ambition. No matter how unwilling he was, he had to admit this fact. At this moment, he seemed to be much older again. With a hoarse voice, he said to Wei Jian, "I'm tired, Go back to the Temple of Yang. Grassland, Wanyan Department. The reunified Hyman posed a great threat to the Sushan tribe. However, this time, the tribes felt very peaceful. Hyman is still the Hyman before, but Sushan is no longer the Sushan before. Under the leadership of the extremely wise Khan, Sushan has formed an alliance with the Chen state and the Chu state. The three countries trade with each other for mutual benefit, allowing the people to live a life that they have never had before. This time the black barbarians invaded. The Chen state, Chu state, and the western regions each sent 100,000 reinforcements to support them. With such powerful reinforcements, the mere black barbarians are nothing. Maybe this time is their chance to defeat the black barbarians and become the sole masters of the grassland. Ayu walked into the tent and said, "Khan, the Chu reinforcements are less than 100 miles away from us." The Chen state, the Chu state, and the western regions supported them from three different directions. Among them, the Chu state was the closest and the reinforcements arrived the fastest. Reinforcements from the other two countries had to wait for some more time. Wang Yanyan stood up and said, "Let Ayana go there in person, don't neglect me." Ayu nodded and immediately went to inform Ayana. Wanyanyan walked out of the tent alone, walked out of the camp, and came to a grassy slope. She sat down on the grass slope, her hands around her knees, and looked into the distance. The endless grassland in the near distance, the shadowy forest in the distance, and the silver snow-capped mountains at the end of her sight. Her eyes were full of familiar scenes, but she could not see the person she wanted to see. In the past 2 years, she wanted to chase Chen state more than once, but she was the Khan of the grassland. When the threat of Hyman was not eliminated, she could not abandon her subjects. This time, if she could completely defeat Hyman and become the only master of the grassland, she would have no worries and could do whatever she wanted. Thinking of this, her heart was instantly filled with expectations. Under the grass slope, Tang Ning stood there, looking at Wanyanyan sitting on her knees, with a trace of pity in her eyes. The figure was still as thin as ever, helpless and confused. In the past few years, many cruel things happened to her, which made the innocent and romantic girl become the Khan of dozens of Sushan tribes in a very short time, and became one of the most respected people in the world. She had to grow up quickly to shoulder the responsibilities on her shoulders. Women of the same age as him only had the responsibility of supporting their husbands and raising children, but she shouldered a country and a nation. Tang Ning walked slowly up the grass slope. Wanyanyan had her back to him. When she heard the footsteps, she didn't turn around and said, "Go to the big tent and wait first. Let me be alone." Tang Ning shook his head helplessly and said, "Yes, Khan." The figure sitting on the grass trembled, and the next moment he jumped up suddenly and looked back. Tang Ning looked at the extremely surprised expression on her face and the little sparkling in her eyes, and his heart trembled, and he opened his arms to her. A light shadow flew over from the front and Tang Ning was knocked to the ground by her. The two of them rolled down the grass slope in an instant. At the bottom of the grass slope, Xiao Xiao covered her eyes with a red face, and her crystal clear eyes blinked between her fingers. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 964. Tang Ning got up from the grass and patted the grass clippings on her body. After 2 years of not seeing each other, the little man girl who has become Khan is still so fast-paced in her work. Wanyanyan held Tang Ning's arm and asked excitedly, "Why are you here? Are you here to pick me up? Where will we take you?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Is your Khan inappropriate?" Wanyanyan's brows suddenly furrowed and she asked, "Do you want to regret it?" Tang Ning was sure that if he dared to say no, the scene before her would change from a reunion after a long absence to a meeting between enemies. This is Wanyanyan's territory. She can summon hundreds of warriors with a wave of her hand and tie him up to complete their unfinished wedding. Tang Ning shook her head and said, "How could I regret it?" A smile appeared on Wang Yanyan's face again, and she said, "Then you stay here for now. When we defeat the black man, you can take me home." Women on the grassland express their feelings so nakedly and without any concealment. Tang Ning smiled, held her face with both hands, and said, "Okay, okay, I promise you." Wang Yanyan held his arm, with a happy expression on her face, and asked, "Did you come with Chen Guo's reinforcements?" Tang Ning said, "I am following the reinforcements from Chu State." "Why?" Wang Yanyan had a puzzled expression on her face. "Don't ask why yet." Tang Ning held her hand and walked to the front, looked at Li Tianlan, and said to Wang Yanyan, "Call me sister." Compared to Li Tianlan, Wang Yanyan had no resistance to this kind of thing. She didn't care at all about calling someone sister. As long as Tang Ning didn't leave her here alone, everything was easy to discuss. Li Tianlan was the commander-in-chief of the Chu army. After meeting Yan Yan, he returned to the army. On the grassy slope, the two of them sat side by side. Wang Yanyan leaned her head on Tang Ning's shoulder and asked, "How did you become the emperor of the western regions?" Tang Ning said, "This matter is not urgent. I will tell you slowly later." Wang Yanyan asked again, "Then the reinforcements from the western region were also sent by you?" Tang Ning nodded and did not deny it. Wang Yanyan leaned on his shoulder, feeling full of security in her heart. Compared to being a Khan on the grassland, she actually prefers to be a little woman, hiding behind her sweetheart, and he will block any wind and rain for her. Tang Ning quite enjoyed the feeling of being relied upon, but it was already getting dark and the mosquitoes on the grassland were noisy. He waved his hand, drove away a few mosquitoes, and said, "It's getting late, go back and rest." Wang Yanyan nodded and said, "Let's go." Not long after, Tang Ning looked at her in Wang Yan's department and asked, "Where should I sleep?" Wang Yanyan pointed to the largest tent in front. Tang Ning looked at her in surprise and asked, "Isn't that your camp?" Wang Yanyan said matter-of-factly, "We are already married, you are my husband-in-law, of course we will sleep together." While Tang Ning was stunned on the spot, she had already forcefully dragged her in. "Hey, wait a minute. What are you waiting for?" "I've been waiting for 2 years." 2 years later, Wang Yanyan was obviously no longer the little white flower who thought that two people lying in bed for one night were a real couple. After all, Tang Ning could not compete with this enthusiastic little wild horse that night. Wang Yanyan carefully put away the sheets, looked at Tang Ning provocatively, and said, "From now on, you are mine." The danger of the black man is approaching, but Wang Yanyan, as the Khan, has been pestering Tang Ning these past few days, just having fun. According to Chen Guo's standards for judging monarchs, she can be regarded as an out-and-out feint monarch. But in fact, she didn't have to worry about the war at all. Although Xiao Maniu has a good foundation in martial arts, leading troops in battle is not her strong point. Su Shen's army is led by Ayana, and Lao Zheng is already on the field. As a Khan, she only needs to wait for the result in the commander's tent. Good. After half a month of this kind of day, the belated reinforcements from Chengguo finally arrived. After the attendant made the announcement, a figure walked into the tent and saluted Wang Yanyan, "Xiaoju has met Khan." Wang Yanyan sat up straight, finally looking a little like a Khan, and said, "General Xiao, no courtesy." Xiaoju raised his head and was about to speak when he suddenly saw Tang Ning next to Wang Yanyan and said happily, "Why are you here?" Tang Ning also didn't expect that with so many generals in the Chen kingdom, Emperor Chen would actually send Xiaoju out. It seemed that in the 2 years since he was absent from the capital, this guy should be doing pretty well in the capital. "Where have you been for more than a year?" In the big tent, Xiaoju raised his glass and touched Tang Ning, asking, "Why is there no news at all? The world is so big, just take a look around." Tang Ning said, What about you, how many children have you had? When mentioning this matter, Xiaoju showed a proud look on his face and said, there are already 2, how about you? Tang Ning said, there is only 1 at the moment. What? Xiaoju was stunned when he heard this, and said with some disbelief, you can really do it? I will make up for the gifts when you return to Beijing, Xiaoju said, and then his face became solemn again and asked, do you know that Emperor Chu agreed to Xiaowen's marriage proposal and wanted to marry Princess Changning? It's past. Some of Tang Ning's affairs were no secret to Xiaoju. Tang Ning nodded and said, I know. Why are you still so calm? Xiaoju looked at him and said, after the matter on the grassland is over, you should return to the capital as soon as possible. We suggest that His Majesty send troops to the western regions to pacify Xiaowen and capture the lustful Xiaowen ruler. Then your Miss Li won't have to get married. Tang Ning waved her hand and said, no. Why? Xiaoju looked at him puzzledly and asked, do you want to watch her marry someone else? Tang Ning looked at him and said, because I am the lustful Xiaowen ruler. Xiaoju looked at her in astonishment and said, what nonsense are you talking about? How could you be the Xiaowen ruler? I heard that the Xiaowen ruler was a middle-aged man over 40. Tang Ning said, that's my father. After a long time, Xiaoju came back to his senses from the shock. He looked straight at Tang Ning and asked, are you the current Xiaowen ruler? Tang Ning nodded. Xiaoju asked again, are you the one who asked for marriage from Chu? Tang Ning nodded again. Xiaoju seemed to remember something and asked, what about the little wild horse on the grassland? Tang Ning said, it's mine too. Xiaoju thought for a moment and said, let me guess, are you also planning to ask for marriage from His Majesty? Tang Ning did not deny it. Xiaoju was silent for a moment and asked again, do you know the princesses of Xifen and Haoliang? Tang Ning shook his head and said, I really don't know them. Princess of Chu, Princess of Chen, Khan of the Grassland. Xiaoju looked at him and shook his head, tell me, is this something a human would do? Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 965. Tang Ning glanced at Xiaoju and asked, you married your niece and became close friends with your father-in-law. Is that what a human would do? This was something he could not refute. Xiaoju immediately retracted his head and laughed, just a joke, just a joke. Tang Ning did not continue the topic and asked, how is the capital this year? Xiaoju said, it is the same as it was before you left. Since Prince Kong and Prince Duan were imprisoned and the entire Tang family was executed, no one has caused trouble in the capital. Although the rebellion of Prince Kong and Prince Duan was a big blow to Emperor Chen, it also cleared up the court. It can be said that there are both advantages and disadvantages. For now, the most important thing for the state of Chen is to help the Sushan people and defeat the black barbarians. From another perspective, this is also to help the state of Chen clear an unstable factor. Although the black barbarians are strong, they are only slightly stronger than the Sushan tribe at most. With the addition of Chen, Chu, and the western regions, the Wanyan tribe has doubled its strength and is almost suppressing the black barbarians. Of course, on the vast grassland, even the four-nation coalition forces would not be able to completely defeat the black barbarians. Since the black barbarians changed from attacking to guerrilla defense and roamed around on the grassland, it is not so easy to defeat them head-on. After all, if they really want to escape, they can hardly be caught up on the grassland. This battle will not be over in a short time. Tang Ning stayed in the Wanyan tribe for 2 months and planned to return to Gizhu. Xiao Ai is about to give birth, and he is worried. Tang Ning has almost coaxed Li Tianlan and Wanyan Yan. One of them has to lead troops and cannot leave for the time being, and the other is the Khan. It is even more impossible for them to leave with Tang Ning now. Everything has to wait until the war on the grassland has a result. Although Chen Chu offered assistance to the grassland, he did not give them the troops to command. Only Li Tianlan could mobilize the Chu army, and the 100,000-strong army of Chen only obeyed Xiao Ju's orders. The four countries surrounded the Black Barbarians, and the Black Barbarians were defeated sooner or later. Lao Zheng stayed on the grassland. As the commander of the western region's reinforcements, Xiao Xiao did not follow him back to Guizhou when he learned that Tang Ning would return to Chen soon. Instead, he went back to Chen with the old beggar first and met Tang Ning in the capital at that time. 3 months later, Tang Ning held the eldest lady of the Tang family in his left hand and the young master of the Tang family in his right hand. However, the siblings did not give him face. Although they were held in Tang Ning's arms, they opened their arms and looked at their mother eagerly. After Zhongyi and Su Ryu took them from Tang Ning's arms, the two little guys immediately settled down. This scene immediately changed Tang Ning's mind. He planned to stay here for a month to build a good relationship with his daughter and son, and then return to the capital to deal with the last few things he had in Chen State. Hard work pays off. After Tang Ning was almost inseparable for a month, the two little guys finally began to stick to him, which made Tang Ning feel relieved and satisfied as a father for the first time. During the time when Tang Ning was away, Tang Yaoyao also left Guizhou. Although Tang Ning gave up part of the business in Chen State, she had begun to explore the western region market. In addition to Guizhou, grasslands, and Chu State, the Tang family's business had spread to the surrounding countries under her. After the demise of Liang State, the rebels of that year re-established the later Liang regime in Yunnan. These days, they were also restless. Under the instigation of Gongsun Ying, they wanted to take over Guizhou again and restore Liang State to its most prosperous period. However, in the past few months, Su Mei and several elders' actions have completely calmed them down, and Yunnan has become much quieter. As for Gongsun Ying, he barely escaped from the siege of several elders and is now missing. Tang Ning stayed in Guizhou for a few more days before embarking on the road back to Beijing. This trip to the capital is destined to be not peaceful. Tang Ning cannot imagine what kind of conflict will break out between him and Emperor Chen. However, no matter what will happen in the future, he must face it head-on. At the same time, in the capital, Tian Ran is in the center. Gongsun Ying looks at Bai Jin and the middle-aged man opposite and says, "The saint has subdued the 10 elders, and our plan has failed." Su Mei successfully became the saint of Wangu sect according to their plan, but she rejected their plan to restore the country. This once made Bai Jin and Gongsun Ying, the two sisters, confused, but they have been planning for this plan for more than 10 years, how could they give up? In the past 2 years, Bai Jin continued her layout in the capital, while Gongsun Ying went deep into Yunnan and provoked conflicts between Haoliang and Qian. However, just when she was about to succeed, the appearance of several elders crushed her conspiracy, causing her previous efforts to fail and her plan in Yunnan to fail. Bai Jin looked stern and said, "If I had known this would happen, I shouldn't have adopted her." "What's the point of saying this now?" Gongsun Ying frowned and asked, "How is the situation here?" Bai Jin said, "Everything is under control, but now is not a good time to take action." Gongsun Ying looked at her and said, "Then you have to be careful." Bai Jin said, "Be careful of what?" Gongsun Ying said, "He's back." When Tang Ning came back this time, there were only 2 elders around him. His mother-in-law had a grandson and had no plans to return to Beijing. She just asked him to tell his father-in-law when he came back. Xiao Xiao and the old beggar had returned to the capital a month ago. Tang Ning quietly entered the capital without attracting anyone's attention. He did not enter the palace or go to the Anyang princess's mansion. He wanted to rest for a night before reporting to Emperor Chen and making other plans. Prince Huai's mansion. Prince Huai closed the door of the study. Bai Jin came out from behind the screen and asked, "Tang Ning has returned to the capital. Will it affect your plan?" Prince Huai said, "The Yulin Guard is under control and can take action at any time. He can't interfere with the affairs of the palace." What will be the impact? Bai Jin asked, when do you plan to take action? Prince Huai said, soon. I hope there won't be any mistakes. Bai Jin glanced at him, and when she was about to leave, Prince Huai stopped her. Bai Jin looked at him and asked, is there anything else? King Huai said, did you forget something? Bai Jin thought for a moment, took out a porcelain bottle from her arms, and said, use it the same as before. King Huai did not take the porcelain bottle, but looked at her and said, I have something else to do. Bai Jin asked, what is it? King Huai said calmly, to detoxify the princess, you can plant the poison on me. Bai Jin raised his eyebrows and asked, are you serious? If the poison could be planted on King Huai, it would be good, but he was good at martial arts and was very vigilant. It was almost impossible to poison him silently. But she knew in her heart that controlling King Huai was much better than controlling a princess. King Huai said, she has not been in good health these days, so I will bear the suffering for her. Bai Jin thought of King Huai's methods and hesitated again, saying, this matter is troublesome, so let's forget it. Do as I say. King Huai looked at her indifferently and said, you have no choice. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 966. Bai Jin looked at King Huai for a long time, and finally nodded and said, okay. Don't play any tricks. King Huai looked at her and said, otherwise, all our agreements will be invalidated. Bai Jin looked at the figure in front of her, and had a vague illusion that she had never really controlled him over the years. What they had was just that she used the power of Tianrunju to help him stabilize his position in the court step by step, and his promise to himself was still just an empty promise. Although there were reasons why they were not prepared, King Huai still gave her a feeling of being difficult to control. If they could completely control King Huai on the condition of removing the poison from Princess Huai, it would also be a good thing for them. She took out a milky white porcelain bottle from her bosom, put it on the table, and said, take this medicine for 3 days, and the princess's poison can be cured. After that, she poured out a brown pill from another porcelain bottle and said, please take this poison pill, Your Highness. Huai Wang. Huai Wang took the poison pill from her hand and swallowed it without hesitation. Bai Jin watched him take the pill, and then said, you always said that the time has not come yet. When will the time come? Huai Wang breathed a sigh of relief and said, now. Bai Jin showed a happy look on her face, but she did not notice the sarcasm in Huai Wang's eyes when he looked at her. Since the rebellion of King Kong and King Duan failed and they were imprisoned in the palace, and the entire Tang family was executed, there has been no major disturbance in the court. However, Chen Guo's luck did not seem to be good. Just after the internal troubles were settled, foreign troubles came one after another. The enemy unified the western regions and its strength increased greatly. The most reliable ally became the enemies-in-law in a blink of an eye. Tang Ning felt that Emperor Chen should not be in a good mood these days, so he went to the palace the second day after returning to Beijing, so as to prevent him from taking advantage of the situation and venting his anger on himself. In the bedroom, Emperor Chen leaned against the head of the bed, looked at Tang Ning coldly, and said, you still remember to come back. Tang Ning stood with his hands folded, his face not red, and said, I am worried about your health, so I returned to Beijing in advance. Emperor Chen waved his hand and asked, where have you been for more than a year? Even I can't find your trace. Tang Ning said honestly, Your Majesty, I went to Guizhou. Guizhou? Emperor Chen frowned and asked, what did you do in Guizhou? Tang Ning said, Your Majesty, I don't know that 2 years ago, I met a wandering Taoist priest. The Taoist priest said that my fate was in conflict with the capital. If I wanted to have children, I needed to go to the southwest to find opportunities. It happened that I had been to Guizhou once. Seeing that the place was beautiful and pleasant, I took my wives to stay in Guizhou for a while. Stayed for a while, Emperor Chen snorted coldly, you have been living there for almost 2 years. Have you found the opportunity? Tang Ning smiled and said, the Taoist priest is really a god. To be honest with your majesty, I already have a pair of children. When Emperor Chen heard this, his expression was stunned and asked, do you have children? Tang Ning nodded and said, I have been deeply troubled by this matter in the past few years, and now I finally got my wish. There are 3 unfilial acts, and the greatest one is to have no descendants. Having children and carrying on the family line is a big deal, and Emperor Chen can't blame him too much for this matter. However, as long as he thought about the fact that Zioan had unified the western regions in the past 2 years and hooked up with Chu and the grassland, the border of Chen state was dangerous at every step. He himself had difficulty eating and sleeping because of this matter, but Tang Ning, as the prime minister of a country, actually hid in a beautiful place to have a child with his wife, and a nameless fire surged in his heart. He looked at Tang Ning and asked unhappily, have you heard about the western regions? Tang Ning nodded and said, on the way back to Beijing, I heard that Zioan annexed Daoyuzan and unified the western regions. The ruler of Zioan is really powerful. Emperor Chen coughed and looked at him with dissatisfaction, as if he was unhappy with praising the enemy. Although he also felt that this was true, it was a bit of a boost to others' ambitions and a loss of his own prestige. Not only that, he looked at Tang Ning, his face became solemn, and said, Zioan not only unified the western regions, but also successfully married the Chu state. Princess Changning of the Chu state is about to marry the ruler of Zioan. In this way, my Chen state not only lost a reliable ally, but also gained a powerful enemy. What do you think I should do, and what should the court do? Tang Ning thought for a while and said, Your Majesty is worried that Zioan and Chu will join forces to deal with our Chen state. Emperor Chen looked very serious and said, perhaps we should also add a grassland. This time, the western regions also sent troops to reinforce Sushan in the Black Barbarian disaster. I don't know what they are trying to do. What are you thinking? Tang Ning said, I think your Majesty is worrying too much. Emperor Chen looked at him and said, tell me what you think. Tang Ning pondered for a moment and said, Your Majesty is worried that Zioan and Chu will join forces to deal with Chen, but the fact is that since Zioan unified the western regions, it has been wholeheartedly seeking development and has a very friendly attitude towards merchants from various countries. It has never provoked friction with Chen. This may mean that Zioan is also willing to coexist peacefully with us. Emperor Chen looked at him and said, Don't forget that the war between Chen and Zioan was originally provoked by Zioan. Tang Ning said, but I heard that Zioan has changed its ruler. Perhaps the new ruler is a good ruler who desires peace. Otherwise, why didn't they start a war after they became stronger? What you said is not impossible. Emperor Chen thought for a while and said, but it's just a possibility. We still have to be fully prepared. Tang Ning looked at Emperor Chen and said, I think that the ruler of Zioan may also want to seek peace through marriage when he asked for marriage with Chu. Maybe they will come to my Chen country to ask for marriage in a while. Speaking of this, a trace of doubt appeared on Emperor Chen's face, and he asked, when my Chen country asked for marriage, Chu refused us on the pretext that the princess could not marry outside. Why did they suddenly agree to the western regions this time? Tang Ning lowered his head and said, I heard that the ruler of Zioan not only has a great talent for governing the country, but also looks elegant and handsome. He is a hero among heroes. Perhaps Chu thinks that such a person, the princess who is worthy of them, simply agreed to it. Emperor Chen looked at him and said unhappily, which side are you on? Tang Ning immediately straightened his face and asked, Your Majesty, if Zioan also came to my Chen kingdom to ask for marriage, what would your Majesty do? Emperor Chen glanced at him and said, Don't worry, since I have agreed to your and manners affairs, I will not go back on my word. Even if the western regions ask for marriage, I will not agree to them. Tang Ning. Emperor Chen thought for a while and said, however, you are right. If the Western regions really want to make peace, it is a win-win situation. I can't refuse it, but except Manor, I don't have a suitable princess around me. He thought about it and suddenly said, by the way, Anyang is not married yet. I might as well make her a princess now, just in case. Tangning. Emperor Chen showed a hint of satisfaction on his face, as if he was proud of his own cleverness, and said impatiently, Wei Jian, draft an edict. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 967. Tang Ning's original intention was to ask indirectly to see if Emperor Chen would agree to the marriage proposal from the western regions. Unexpectedly, he actually thought so much and thought about himself so much that he first made Princess Anyang a princess to prevent problems. Not yet. This strange brain circuit immediately made things develop in a strange direction. However, Tang Ning knew clearly that the person he wanted to marry was Zhao Man, not Princess Anyang. After hearing this, she quickly said, Your Majesty, this is not good. Chen Huang glanced at him and asked, What's wrong? Tang Ning said, We did this without asking the princess for her opinion. After all, no one knows what kind of person the Lord Zioan is. What if he is not a good man? Emperor Chen asked back, Didn't you just say that the leader of Zioan kingdom is not only talented in the world, but also handsome in appearance? He even married a princess from the Chu kingdom. Do you think their taste is bad? Tang Ning wanted to slap him in the face right now. Why were you so talkative just now? But he couldn't just watch this oolong develop. He bit the bullet and said, Even if we make the princess a princess, the western region may not recognize it. Emperor Chen looked at him and asked, Why do I think you really want Manor to marry to the western regions? Tang Ning waved her hands repeatedly and said, How is this possible? Then why are you pushing back on Anyang's affairs? Chen Huang looked at him, thinking of something, frowning and asked, You are not also interested in Anyang, are you? No, no, Tang Ning raised her hand and said seriously, I swear on my integrity that everything between me and the princess is still innocent. You have a bad reputation. Emperor Chen glanced at him and said, Since you have no intention of targeting Anyang, then this matter is settled. If someone from the western regions comes to propose marriage, she will be me, Chen, the princess of the country. If people from the western regions don't come, she doesn't have to marry. Seeing that Chen Huang seemed to have made up his mind, Tang Ning opened his mouth, but finally said nothing more. Chen Huang had already become suspicious just now. If he continued to stop her, maybe he really thought he had something in mind for Anyang. But the problem is that the envoys from the western regions are already on their way, and when they pass by the various state capitals, they will express their intention to propose marriage and build momentum first. Even if Tang Ning wants to stop them, it will be too late. He felt quite unhappy. What was this? What he wanted was baby cabbage, but Chen Huang gave him a Chinese cabbage. Although the Chinese cabbage was bigger and more mature, he clearly only wanted baby cabbage. Due to Tang Ning's negligence, this matter was irreversible. He simply didn't think about it for now. He looked up at Emperor Chen and said, Your Majesty, I don't know how the Queen Mother's condition is during the time I left the palace. Why don't you let's go and show the Queen Mother again? Emperor Chen glanced at him and said, I don't think you want to see the Queen Mother, but you want to see Manor. Tang Ning said seriously, Aside from the Queen Mother, I am also very concerned about the princess's health. I'm afraid you will be disappointed this time. Chen Huanjiao shook his head and said, 2 months ago, Manor accompanied the Queen Mother to Jiangnan to relax. It will take some time before she can come back. Even if you go to the harem, you won't be able to see her. Zhao Man was not in the capital, so Tang Ning could only wait here for her return. After leaving the palace, he walked around the Xiao family, Ling family, Lu family, and Fang family, and then walked towards the Princess Anyang's mansion. Emperor Chen always did things so straightforwardly, but within a few hours, many people in the capital knew that Princess Anyang had become Princess Anyang. Although this incident is a bit unexpected, everyone knows that Princess Anyang grew up in the capital and is deeply loved by His Majesty and the Queen Mother. Her real status is no less than that of a favored princess. Your Majesty is now just in the capital. On the surface, he was just trying to clear her name. Therefore, this matter did not cause much sensation in the capital, but at this moment, Princess Anyang looked at Prince Fu and wondered, "Father, what does this mean, Uncle Huang?" This sudden imperial edict also made Prince Fu confused. He shook his head and said, "Your Majesty's things are always unpredictable, and I don't know either. Why did the Emperor suddenly make me a princess?" Princess Anyang looked confused and suddenly said, "Why do I have a bad premonition?" Just when she looked wary, Chi'er trotted in from outside and said excitedly, "Princess, Master Tang is back. There has been no news from Tang Ning for more than a year." Prince Fu did not think of him for a moment and asked casually, "Who is Mr. Tang?" Then as soon as he finished speaking, a gust of fragrant wind blew beside him. When he turned around, he found that Anyang, who was standing next to him just now, had disappeared. In the boudoir, Princess Anyang looked at Tang Ning and asked, "When did you come back?" Tang Ning said, "I just arrived yesterday." Princess Anyang shook her head and said with some regret, "You came back at the wrong time. Xiaoman and the Queen Mother went to Jiangnan, and it should take 2 months before they can come back." Tang Ning said, "It doesn't matter, I'll just wait for her here." He looked at Princess Anyang and asked, "Is the capital's business going well these days?" Princess Anyang rolled her eyes at him and said, "Even Prince Duan and the Tang family have fallen into your hands. Who else dares to disturb Tai Sui?" Tang Ning said, "Thank you for your hard work, Princess." Anyang looked at him and said in surprise, "You know it too?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "When His Majesty made you a princess just now, I was right next to you." When this matter was mentioned, Princess Anyang immediately became interested. She looked at Tang Ning and asked, "You were with Uncle Huang at that time. Do you know why he suddenly made me a princess?" Tang Ning nodded, indicating that she knew. Princess Anyang looked at him and asked, "Tell me quickly, why?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "You should know about Xiaowen's proposal to the Chu kingdom, right?" "Of course I know." Princess Anyang nodded and said, "Uncle Huang was very angry because of this incident. Do you think the western regions want to unite with the Chu state and attack our Chen state?" "Probably not." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I heard that the western region is also planning to propose marriage to my country, Chen, to marry a princess." Princess Anyang curled her lips and said, "Who do they think they are? They can marry whomever they want. Besides, the only princess beside Uncle Huang is Xiaoman, who has not yet left the palace." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Now there are 2. Princess Anyang's expression was startled. After she realized what Tang Ning was saying, her face instantly turned pale. At this moment, her joy at being canonized as a princess was gone. She stared at Tang Ning with her beautiful eyes and asked, "What did you say?" Tang Ning had no intention of hiding this matter from her, and said, "His Majesty's plan is to make you a princess first. If the envoys from the western regions come to propose marriage, he will marry you." The last trace of color on Princess Anyang's face disappeared in an instant. She seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Is it you? Is it because you don't want Xiaoman to marry, so you just give it to the emperor? Uncle came up with such an idea." Although Tang Ning didn't come up with this idea, it had a lot to do with him, and he couldn't argue with it at the moment. Princess Anyang didn't even explain a word when she saw him. She only felt a chill in her body and her heart suddenly turned to despair. The next moment, an extremely angry expression appeared on her face, and she rushed towards Tang Ning with her teeth bared. Tang Ning was pushed to the bed unexpectedly by her. Princess Anyang straddled him unladylikely and pinched his neck. The expression on her face was both angry and disappointed. There was a cry in her voice as she said in a trembling voice, "The last name is damn it, you bastard who forgets his friends after seeing sex, I will kill you." Fortunate young gentleman author, Wrong Xiao Wrong. Chapter 968. Although Princess Anyang pinched Tang Ning's neck, she did not use any force. After pinching her, she let go and began to wipe away her tears. She knew her imperial uncle, and if Zia really came to Chen to propose marriage, he would marry her without hesitation for the sake of peace between the two countries. Tang Ning hated seeing women cry the most, especially when she was sitting on top of him and crying. But at this moment, he couldn't struggle. He could only look up at her and said helplessly, "Can you just listen to me first?" Princess Anyang wiped away her tears and said, "You bastard who forgets his true love, if Uncle Huang really wants to marry me to the western regions, I will die in front of you. Even if I am a ghost, I will never let you go." "Do you think I would betray my friends?" Tang Ning looked at her and shook her head. "This matter was His Majesty's idea. I also tried to persuade him, but it was of no use." "Really?" Princess Anyang looked at him, and her eyes regained a trace of vitality. It seemed that what she cared about was not that she was marrying to the western region, but that it was Tang Ning who came up with the idea. "Really?" Tang Ning covered her chest and said, "Your Majesty was almost angry because of this. The most important thing right now is to calm this woman down. As for whether she betrays Huang Chen or not, Tang Ning doesn't care." "I don't care." Although Princess Anyang stopped crying, she still looked at Tang Ning condescendingly and said, "I don't want to marry to the western regions. Please help me find a way." This matter was originally caused by him, so he must be held responsible to the end. Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Don't worry, leave this matter to me. I will definitely not let you marry to the western regions." Princess Anyang looked at Tang Ning blankly. She didn't expect him to agree so simply, and she couldn't help but feel a warm feeling in her heart. Tang Ning saw her stunned and said awkwardly, "Well, Princess, can you get off of me first?" Princess Anyang looked down and realized how outrageous her actions had been when she was angry. Her face turned red and she immediately climbed off of Tang Ning. "What are you doing?" At this moment, an angry voice suddenly came from the door of his room. King Fu looked at the two people on the bed, his face flushed, and he said angrily, in broad daylight, "What a shame, what a shame." Princess Anyang got off Tang Ning in a panic and explained, "We." "Shut up," Prince Fu glared at her fiercely and said, "Do you think I am blind?" Tang Ning got up from the bed, gently adjusted her robe, looked at Prince Fu, and said calmly, "Your Majesty, I really misunderstood. It's just that the princess just heard the news that His Majesty was going to marry her to the western regions, and she was excited for a moment. It's understandable." King Fu originally had many questions in his mind, but he was stunned when he heard this and asked, "What did you say?" Successfully changing the subject, Tang Ning secretly glanced at Princess Anyang and explained, "There is news that the envoy from Zioan is coming to the Chen kingdom to propose marriage to their king. His Majesty made the princess a princess for this reason." "And the preparation?" Prince Fu stood there stunned and murmured, "The Lord of Zioan." Princess Anyang looked at him and said, "Father, I don't want to be a princess, nor do I want to marry to the western regions." "Nonsense," Prince Fu glanced at her and said, "If this is His Majesty's arrangement, then the matter is settled." Princess Anyang's beautiful eyes widened and she looked at him in disbelief, as if she suddenly didn't recognize him. Prince Fu looked at Tang Ning calmly and said, "Since the Lord of Zioan has this intention, from today onwards, please ask Prime Minister Tang not to come to the Princess Mansion again. It will not be good for you or Anyang if word spreads." Princess Anyang looked at Prince Fu, moved her lips, and asked in a trembling voice, "Father, father, do you also want me to marry to the western regions?" A trace of pain flashed deep in King Fu's eyes, but his face remained calm and he said, "It is hard to disobey the king's orders. You are a descendant of the royal family, don't you understand this truth?" Princess Anyang looked at him disappointedly, but didn't say anything more. She covered her mouth and turned around and ran out quickly. Tang Ning looked at Prince Fu, shook her head and said, "As a father, Your Majesty, you are going too far." King Fu grabbed his collar fiercely, veins popped out on the back of his hands, his eyes were bloodshot, and he gritted his teeth and said, "What do you know?" "I don't know what you are thinking." Tang Ning looked at him with disappointed eyes and said, "But I know that if you don't let go, I will fight back." Prince Fu looked at him and said, "In so many years, you are the first to talk to me like this." Tang Ning smiled and said, "Your Majesty is not the first to talk to me like this. Forget it, I don't want to provoke the bad guy." At a certain moment, Prince Fu suddenly showed a smile on his face. While letting go of his hand, he smoothed his collar and said, "Go after Anyang, don't let her fudge." Tang Ning glanced at him, shook her head inexplicably, and turned to leave. Prince Fu watched his back go away. It wasn't until Tang Ning's figure completely disappeared from his eyes that he breathed a sigh of relief and whispered, "Let's go, the further away the better, and never come back." Somewhere on the outskirts of the capital, by a stream, a figure sat on a big rock, burying his head in his knees and sobbing softly. Tang Ning walked over and sat down next to her without saying a word. Princess Anyang raised her head, and Tang Ning handed over the candied horse she just bought on the street, and said, "Actually, the western regions are not as bad as you think. There are also beautiful peach fields there, and I heard that the Princess of Zioan is very talented." "Suave, ah, why are you biting me?" Princess Anyang took the candied horse of apples, bit Tang Ning's wrist, and said viciously, "If I want to marry you, even if I marry you, I won't marry him." Tang Ning looked at her and asked dissatisfied, "What do you mean?" Princess Anyang took a bite of the candied horse and said, "Although you are equally as bold as you, but rather than taking advantage of a stranger, it would be better to take advantage of you." Seeing that her words were getting more and more outrageous, Tang Ning quickly waved her hands and said, "Don't worry, I will help you solve it when I say I will help you solve it. Even if His Majesty orders it, I can still steal you out." Princess Anyang glanced at him and asked, "Why do you take such a big risk for me?" Tang Ning said, "Walking in the world depends on the word righteousness. If you are a friend, of course I will help you." Princess Anyang said, "Since we are friends, can you do me another favor?" Tang Ning said, "Through mountains of swords and seas of fire, I will not give up even if I die." "I don't want you to go up mountains of swords and seas of fire. I just want your shoulder to lean on." Princess Anyang moved towards Tang Ning, rested her head on his shoulder, and said, "Xiao Man is not here, his lend me your things first." Although this sentence sounded a little wrong, considering that she was so sad today, Tang Ning quietly let her lean on her and didn't argue with her. Princess Anyang leaned on his shoulder and said, "Father was not like this before." From a father's perspective, King Fu's actions just now were a bit too ruthless. However, as a courtier, he had no choice but to say that she was born in the royal family, and while enjoying some things, she was destined to lose something. Princess Anyang whispered about how Prince Fu had protected her over the years and never let her suffer any grievances, but he severely broke her heart on this most important matter. At a certain moment, she suddenly raised her head, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "Will you always stand by my side?" Of course Tang Ning nodded and said, "We are in the same team." In this matter, he and Anyang County had the same purpose. She didn't want to marry him, and Tang Ning didn't dare to marry her. Princess Anyang's eyes showed a hint of brilliance, she breathed a long sigh of relief and said, "Thank you, I'm much better now." Tang Ning stood up, patted her butt and said, "It's getting late, I'll take you back." Princess Anyang shook her head and said, "I don't want to go back to the princess's mansion." Tang Ning said, "Then where are you going?" "I'll take you there, why are you looking at me like that?" Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 969. Princess Anyang glanced at Tang Ning and asked, "As a friend, can't I stay at your house for a few nights? The Tang family has many empty rooms." If it were normal, it would not be a problem for Princess Anyang to stay for a few nights. But now Xiru and Xiaoi are not here. There are only Tang Ning, the old beggar and Xiao Xiao in the mansion, and there are not many servants. People who know think that Princess Anyang ran away from home because she was angry with Prince Fu. People who don't know think that Tang Ning took advantage of the absence of his wife to have a sexual relationship with her. Tang Ning thought about it and suggested, "How about I help you get a room in the inn?" Princess Anyang said, "I have never stayed in an inn before, I am not used to it." At this time, she was actually considering whether she could get used to it. She was indeed a spoiled royal child. Tang Ning was still a little hesitant and asked, "The princess has friends all over the capital, can't you find a place to stay?" "Didn't you say you would help me solve the marriage?" Princess Anyang glanced at him and said, "I feel at ease with you." She said so, Tang Ning had nothing to say. If he refused, he would probably have an unpleasant argument with her. He waved his hand helplessly and said, "Then let's go." Tang Mansion. Tang Ning led Princess Anyang into the Tang family and told a maid, "Purchase a guest room." After settling Princess Anyang, Tang Ning went to the study alone. He didn't expect that the marriage proposal would cause such a big mistake. It was too late to stop the Zioan envoy now. He could only wait until they came to Beijing and think of other ways. Speaking of which, he originally wanted to marry Zhao Man back in a grand manner this time, but he didn't get a small cabbage, but a big cabbage. If Emperor Chen insisted on marrying Princess Anyang, Zioan would not be so picky. After all, their original intention was to make peace with the state of Chen, not to choose a concubine for themselves. Tang Ning sat in the study, thinking about possible solutions, and a fragrant breeze drifted in from outside. Princess Anyang, who had just taken a bath, walked into Tang Ning's study with her hair loose, looking here and there, behaving quite casually, not treating her as a guest at all. After reading, he pinched a piece of cake from the plate in front of Tang Ning and put it in his mouth. Even Tang Ning himself had a very absurd idea in his heart, as if she was not a guest, but the hostess here. This also made him a little regretful. He should have insisted on taking her to the inn to get a room. Princess Anyang poured herself another cup of tea. After eating and drinking, she looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Where are your wives?" Tang Ning said, "They are not in the capital." Princess Anyang felt relieved for some reason. She looked at Tang Ning again and asked, "Have you thought of a solution?" If Emperor Chen had decided on this matter, even Tang Ning could not change his mind. However, although she could not change the cause and process, she could change the ending. The worst result would probably be that Princess Anyang really married to the western regions, and then Tang Ning would give her freedom. Princess Anyang's problem was not a problem, but Zhao Man's problem was. Tang Ning could not marry her back openly according to the previous plan. Maybe she would have to make her fake her death again. Seeing that Tang Ning ignored her, Princess Anyang tapped the table with her fingers and said, "Did you hear me?" Tang Ning came back to her senses, looked at her and asked, "Tell me, if the king of Zioan wants to marry you and Zioman at the same time, will his majesty agree?" Princess Anyang curled her lips in disdain. Who does he think he is? Because of Princess Anyang's stay, Tang Ning didn't know how many times the old beggar and Xiao Xiao looked at him with strange eyes. In general, having one more person in the house is nothing more than having one more pair of chopsticks when eating, and one more person hanging around in front of him every day. Although Princess Anyang is a woman, she is very stubborn and will not change her mind easily. In the past few days, Prince Fu came twice in person, but did not invite her back. With nothing to do, Prince Fu had to point the finger at Tang Ning and warned him that if his daughter was missing something that shouldn't be missing during the time she lived in the Tang mansion, he would not let Tang Ning go. Prince Fu was totally overthinking about this. During the days that Princess Anyang lived in Tang mansion, she had 3 meals a day, and she had a lot of food every day. She also had to eat some midnight snacks with Tang Ning occasionally. She would only have more things on her body, not less. Fortunately, there had been no movement in Tang Mansion for more than a year, so no one noticed it. No one knew that Princess Anyang, who was just canonized by His Majesty, had started a cohabitation era with the current right Prime Minister who had quietly returned to Beijing. 10 days passed like this. During these days, Princess Anyang and Tang Ning ate and drank together, played chess occasionally, and chatted. They lived a comfortable life. However, one day, the news from the palace made her completely panic. Envoy Zioan had entered the capital, wanting to sign a peace treaty with the state of Chen, and proposed to marry the princess of the state of Chen. At present, Zioan was the biggest threat to the state of Chen, and the court attached great importance to their attitude towards the state of Chen. Therefore, since the Zioan envoys left the western regions and stepped onto the sandbar, the local government escorted them all the way to the capital, leaving Tang Ning without even the opportunity to communicate with them in advance. The eunuch from the palace looked at Princess Anyang and said, "Princess, His Majesty asked you to come to the palace." Then he looked at Tang Ning and said, "Prime Minister Tang, His Majesty also announces your entry into the palace." Although he was confused as to why Princess Anyang was here with Prime Minister Tang, His Majesty had announced the announcement together, which saved him some trouble. Princess Anyang looked at Tang Ning with panic in her eyes. Tang Ning gave her a comforting look and said, "Let's go into the palace and take a look before we talk." In the imperial study room, the atmosphere at the moment was a bit anxious. The fact that the western region could propose peaceful coexistence with Chen state confirmed Tang Ning's words that day, which naturally made Emperor Chen overjoyed. For an emperor, nothing is more important than the stability of the barbarians and the people living and working in peace and contentment. However, the envoy from the western regions did not know how to adapt, which also made him feel dissatisfied. They wanted to marry Chen Guo, but they only recognized Princess Pingyang. Even before that, he had canonized Anyang as a princess, but there was only a one-word difference, but the envoys from the western regions refused to compromise. Several Zioan envoys stood in the palace with extremely firm expressions on their faces, showing no intention of compromising at all. After all, the task given to them by the king was to marry Princess Pingyang. If the king said Princess Pingyang, then it could only be Princess Pingyang, and other people were not within their scope of consideration. Although Chen Huang was angry at these people's inflexibility, he did not think about compromising on this matter. After all, he knew what happened to Manner and Tang Ning. If he agreed to these people's request, what would Tang Ning think? I am afraid that as long as he nods to Envoy Zioan, he will lose one of his most valued ministers. He had great expectations for Tang Ning, so naturally he would not do such a stupid thing. He looked at the stubborn people, took a deep breath, and said very patiently, "Although Anyang is not my biological daughter, I have always treated her as my biological daughter. He is also the noble princess of our Chen country. Please think about it carefully." The leading envoy Zioan looked firm and shook his head. "I'm sorry, this is the order of the king. We cannot change it. Please forgive me." Emperor Chen finally showed an angry look on his face, and just as he was about to get angry, a eunuch came in and reported, "Prime Minister Tang and Princess Anyang have arrived." Chen Huang forcibly suppressed the anger in his heart and said, "Xian." Tang Ning and Princess Anyang walked into the imperial study and found that Emperor Chen and Prince Fu were there. After bowing to Emperor Chen, he looked at the three Zioan envoys in the palace. At the glance of his gaze, the bodies of the three people immediately stiffened, and even their backs became straighter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 970. Although Princess Anyang did not know Zioan's envoys, she could guess their identities based on their clothes. Naturally, she had no good feelings toward envoy Zioan. She just glanced at them and stood aside quietly. Emperor Chen pointed at Tang Ning and Princess Anyang, and introduced to the envoy Zioan, "This is my right minister of the Chen kingdom, and the one beside him is Princess Anyang." The three envoys bowed quickly, with an even more respectful attitude than when they met Emperor Chen just now, and saluted, "I have met the Tang Prime Minister, and I have met the Princess." Tang Ning smiled, held her hands up, and said, "You have come a long way, so there is no need to be polite." Emperor Chen came down from above, pointed at Princess Anyang, looked at the three envoys, and said, "This is my Princess Anyang of the Chen kingdom. She is not much better than Princess Changning of the Chu kingdom." Princess Anyang's face turned pale when she heard these words. She bit her lower lip with her teeth, but did not speak. After Chen Huang praised her, he looked at the three of them and said, "You might as well think about it again." Although he didn't say it explicitly, his meaning was already obvious. The three of them turned their gazes towards Tang Ning covertly. Seeing his expressionless face, they immediately said, "We still have to ask the king for advice on this matter before we can make a decision." Emperor Chen frowned and said, "This place is so far away from the western region. How long will it take to send messages back and forth?" Tang Ning smoothed things over and said, "Your Majesty, this matter is of great importance. It is normal for the envoy to be so cautious. Why don't we let them stay in the capital for the next few days? I will take them to experience the customs of the capital, and then I can advise them." Advise them? Although it was a bit too solemn for a prime minister of a country to receive envoys from the western regions, if it were anyone else, it might not be possible to make these stubborn guys change their minds. And Tang Ning happened to specialize in dealing with all kinds of dissatisfaction, so many people fell into his hands, let alone a few Zioan envoys. Once they fall into Tang Ning's hands, they will become submissive within a few days. Emperor Chen thought for a while, then nodded and said, "You must entertain the envoys well these days." Tang Ning cupped her fists and said, "I obey your order." After the three envoys retreated first, Emperor Chen looked at Princess Anyang and asked, "I want you to make peace with the western regions. Are you willing to do that in Anyang?" Princess Anyang's lips trembled, but before she could speak, Prince Fu stood up and said, "This is her honor. Everything is arranged by His Majesty." Princess Anyang looked at him, the brilliance in her eyes quickly disappeared, and she lowered her head without saying a word. Chen Huang nodded and said, "It's best if you think so." After that, he looked at Tang Ning and said, "The envoys from the western regions will be left to you. We must make them change their minds." Tang Ning nodded, glanced at Princess Anyang, and said nothing more. A quarter of an hour later, in the post house where the envoys from the western regions were staying, the three envoys looked at Tang Ning, bowed and said respectfully, "See the Lord. Let's avoid these rituals in Chen State." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "Don't let others notice." The three of them said yes. At this moment, He looked up at Tang Ning and asked, "Master, Emperor Chen does not agree to marry Princess Pingyang to the western regions. What should we do?" Tang Ning knew Chen Huang, and it would be difficult for him to compromise on this matter. From his own position, he could not persuade Chen Huang to change his mind. This would only make him suspicious. Tang Ning said, "I'll think of a solution, you guys just wait." He went out of the palace and took the three of them to eat at a roadside stall. Even though he had entertained the envoys from the western regions, when it came time to pay, the three of them still rushed to pay. Returning to Tang's house, Xiao Xiao walked over, looked at the inner courtyard, and whispered, "Brother, what's wrong with your princess sister? She came back just now and cried very sadly. Go and comfort her. I'm not the one who caused it this time." Tang Ning rubbed her head and walked slowly into the inner courtyard. When Tang Ning walked in, Princess Anyang was sitting in the courtyard of the courtyard, with a packed bundle placed on the stone table. She was no longer crying, but there were still faint traces of tears on her face. "You can stay a few more days." Tang Ning walked over and said, "There's no need to leave in a hurry." Princess Anyang said, "We have to leave after all. It's better to leave early than to leave late." Tang Ning paused and said, "I." Princess Anyang looked at him and asked, "Do you want to persuade His Majesty to let Xiao Man marry to the western regions?" Tang Ning did not deny that he and Xiao Man were of the same mind, and there were no secrets between the two of them. As long as she told her the truth, she would be happy to marry to the western regions happily. Princess Anyang shook her head, "Treat Xiaoman well, don't let me down." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "There are other ways." "Your Majesty's eloquent words, even my father agreed, what else can I do?" Princess Anyang showed a smile on her face, but this smile looked bitter no matter how you looked at it. She stood up, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "There's no need to take this risk for me. You know, this is a matter between two countries. Your Majesty will not let anyone ruin it, not even you. But still, thank you." She picked up the small bundle and walked slowly down the pavilion. When she reached the pavilion, she paused, then turned back, stood in front of Tang Ning, and asked, "Can I hug you?" Without waiting for Tang Ning to answer, she took a step forward and hugged him gently. After a brief hug, she turned around and left again, this time without looking back. Tang Ning touched his face. On one side of his cheek, there was still the touch of her lips. He could feel the mood of Princess Anyang at the moment, and even had the idea of chasing after her and telling her everything. However, this matter was too sensitive. He had to be extremely careful. Any mistake would cause an irreparable mistake. Xiao Xiao walked in from outside, sighed softly, and asked, "Brother, aren't you going to chase her?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "I can only let her suffer for a few days." He looked at Xiao Xiao and asked, "Is your master here?" Xiao Xiao nodded and said, "He is sleeping in the room." When Tang Ning walked into the old beggar's room, he was lying on the bed reading a book. When he saw Tang Ning coming in, he hid the book under his buttocks and asked, "Why, you don't want to accompany that fertile girl, why are you looking for me?" Tang Ning said, "There is an important matter, I want to ask the senior to go to Jiangnan." "No," the old beggar waved his hand and said, "After the last incident, I have nothing to do with you. If you have any questions, go find someone else." Xiao Xiao walked in from outside and asked, "Brother, I can now venture into the world on my own. If you want to go to Jiangnan to do something, just leave it to me." The old beggar suddenly got up from the bed and asked, "What are you going to do in Jiangnan?" Tang Ning said, "Find Princess Pingyang and hide her." Tang Ning thought about it carefully and felt that when Zhao Man returned to Beijing, Emperor Chen might put her under house arrest again in the palace to prevent him. The palace was heavily guarded, and it would be extremely difficult for Tang Ning to take her out of the palace. In comparison, Jiangnan was a good place to start. The old beggar packed his luggage the next day and set off for Jiangnan. Before leaving, he held Xiaoxiao's hand and said earnestly, "My dear disciple, a girl must know how to protect herself when she is alone at home." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 971. Old Zheng is in the grassland, and the old beggar has gone to the south of the Yangtze River. Tang Ning has further strengthened the Tang dynasty's guard force. Although King Kong and King Duan have already retired to the Deep Palace in advance, who knows if there are still any madmen in the capital. Treat him as for the enemy of life and death, he will do some crazy things. In the past few days, the most discussed issue among the people in Beijing was the visit of Zioan envoy to Beijing. If Zioan can reach a consensus on peace with Chen State, the people of Chen State will really be able to get rid of the war and live and work in peace and contentment. However, only a few senior officials in the court knew that Zioan and Chen Guo's peace talks were conditional. Their condition was that Chen Guo would marry Princess Pingyang to Zioan. However, His Majesty did not agree with this matter. He intended to let Princess Anyang, who had just been canonized as a princess, replace Princess Pingyang in marriage. The Zioan envoy did not accept this arrangement. The two parties are still in a stalemate. However, it was the envoy Zioan who finally compromised. In the imperial study room, Emperor Chen glanced at Tang Ning, then looked at the three Zioan envoys and asked, "Have you finally figured it out?" The leader of the envoy said, "Princess Anyang is also a strange woman. I don't think the king will object. Everything will be arranged by your majesty." Chen Huang showed a smile on his face and said, "That's very good." Envoy Zioan finally reached an agreement with Emperor Chen on this matter. Emperor Chen was very happy and decided to treat them to a banquet in a few days. After this conversation, the guests and hosts finally enjoyed themselves. After Envoy Zioan left, Emperor Chen looked at Tang Ning and said, "I asked you to entertain Envoy Zioan well. What have you been doing these days?" Tang Ning innocently said, "Have you entertained them before? When you talk about hospitality, do you mean treating them to a bowl of noodles on the roadside, or is it paid by someone else?" Chen Huang snorted coldly and said, "Other than that, have you seen them in the past few days?" Unexpectedly, Emperor Chen actually sent someone to keep an eye on them, but Tang Ning didn't panic, smiled and said, "Didn't they change their minds?" Speaking of this matter, a trace of doubt appeared on Chen Huang's face, and he asked, "How did you persuade them?" "I tried hard to argue with them, but they didn't agree." "How come you convinced them with just a few words?" Tang Ning said, "Maybe they were moved by that bowl of noodles." Emperor Chen glanced at him and asked, "Do you think I will believe you?" Tang Ning lowered her head and said honestly, "Actually, I told them that if they don't agree, let them die here." Chen Huang was stunned for a moment and asked, "Then what?" "Then they agreed." Emperor Chen looked at him, confused. "As the Prime Minister of my country, Chen, you actually threaten the envoys of other countries." "I am guilty." "You are really, well done." Emperor Chen's face showed a look of pleasure and he said, "The small and powerful foreign countries in the western regions actually want to ride on the head of our country, Chen. We should show them some colors to show the majesty of our big country." As the emperor, he naturally couldn't use Tang Ning's bandit tactics. "I was afraid that no one in the court would do such a thing except him. But it is undeniable that the extraordinary method he used was the most effective." Chen Huang nodded and said, "Very good, now that they have agreed to marry Anyang, you don't have to worry about Xiaoman anymore. You have been back in Beijing for a few days. Go to Shangsha province earlier. Then you are still needed taking charge of the overall situation." Tang Ning nodded in agreement, knowing that he couldn't be lazy anymore until Zhao Man came back. These days, he did not go to Shangsha province. Firstly, he was lazy, and secondly, his father-in-law was Shangsha Zhuoken. If he went to Shangsha province, he would not see each other without looking up every day. How to address each other would still be a problem. After coming out of the palace, he did not go home, but went to Princess Anyang's mansion. Even though King Fu once said that he would not be allowed to come here again, he was still a little worried about Princess Anyang. However, this time, he didn't even enter the princess's mansion. The maid named Yanner stood at the door, looked at Tang Ning, sighed, and said, I'm sorry, Mr. Tang, the princess said she doesn't want to see anyone. Please go back. Tang Ning said, please tell me, Lear, that Tang Ning has something to say to the princess. The princess won't even miss me, right? Mayer shook her head and said, the princess said that the last thing she wants to see is you. In the end, Tang Ning did not enter the princess's mansion and had no choice but to return home. At this time, in the princess's palace, Cheer slowly walked into the room and said to Princess Anyang, who was sitting in front of the mirror, who was much more haggard than a few days ago, Princess, Master Tang was here just now. Princess Anyang looked at the bronze mirror with dull eyes and asked, did the imperial edict just come to the palace? Mayer's expression became depressed and she said, Xiao Wan, the envoy Xiao Wan has agreed to marry the princess. His Majesty said that the wedding will take place in a month. Is there another month? Princess Anyang murmured, and after being silent for a while, she said, Zhener, help me freshen up. It was late at night, and Tang Ning stood in the courtyard, looking up at the bright starry sky, but she was not sleepy at all. The old beggar went to Jiangnan, and she didn't know when he would succeed. Tang Ning had no doubts about his ability, but after he succeeded, Tang Ning herself would have to consider leaving Beijing. If you leave this time, you will probably never come back again. He originally wanted to marry Zhao Man back in a glamorous manner, but fate was not as good as people's calculations. Zhao Man failed to marry him, but he accidentally married Anyang. As the matter has developed to this point, in everyone's eyes, Princess Anyang is already Xiaowen's imperial concubine. Tang Ning can't take her to the western regions and then divorce her. This is actually a political friendship. The significance of this marriage is that Chen State and the western regions have reached a peaceful consensus, which cannot be destroyed unilaterally. It is easy to marry Anyang back, but how to settle her after marrying her is a big problem. Tang Ning admitted that he thought things were too simple at first. There were slow footsteps behind him, and the footsteps were very light. The person coming should be a woman, but she didn't look like Xiao Xiao, because her steps were lighter and not as heavy as this. Tang Ning turned around and looked at the figure who was covered from head to toe in a layer of black cloak, and asked in surprise, Princess. Princess Anyang walked straight into the lighted room and said, come in and talk. Tang Ning followed her into the room, and Princess Anyang closed the door and took off her cloak. Under the dim light, Tang Ning could still see that she had applied delicate light makeup on her face, but this delicate makeup could not hide her pale and haggard complexion. Her clothing style was also different from the conservative style of the past. Below her slender and white neck, her collarbone was delicate and charming, and below her collarbone. Tang Ning's eyes stopped here and did not slide to the collarbone. He looked away and asked, it's so late, Princess, is there something you want to talk to me about? Although she is now a princess, Tang Ning felt that she might not like this title. Princess Anyang did not answer. After taking off her cloak, she also took off the light gauze on the outside. Tang Ning's eyelids jumped, and she finally realized that something was wrong with her. She hurriedly asked, Princess, what's wrong with you? Princess Anyang walked up to Tang Ning, looked into her eyes, and asked, do you like me? Tang Ning looked away and said in a trembling voice, Princess, don't be like this. Princess Anyang placed her hand on his chest and said seriously, answer my question. Tang Ning's heart was beating wildly. He had never thought that things would turn out like this. He looked at Princess Anyang, raised his hands, and smiled bitterly, I confess everything.